Welcome to this Expert Voices seminar. I'm Karen Young, Senior Fellow and Director of the Program on Economics and Energy at the Middle East Institute. And it's my pleasure to have a member of our advisory council of the program, Wayne Ackerman, with us to help explain what's going on in gas markets, how these markets work, and why that matters, of course, when we're thinking about the Middle East and potential help from major LNG supplier Qatar to the potential gas crisis going on in Europe right now. So, Wayne, thank you so much. Welcome to our Expert Voices seminar. And I wonder if you could just tell our audience a little bit about your background, how you know so much about gas markets in the Middle East and globally.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks for hosting this talk. So I've had about 33 years in the global energy business. I'm a geologist by background. I've worked on projects on every continent with the exception of Antarctica. Probably the last 20 years or so has been involved in global gas, primarily LNG, from the front end, such as feed gas strategies, to LNG project development globally. In addition to setting up joint ventures, negotiating with counterparties, screening, opportunity evaluation from anywhere, primarily Australia, Africa, and to North America. Most recently, I spent almost 6 years with Saudi Aramco in the Middle East and was responsible there for developing their international gas strategy. I took that actually to the Saudi Aramco board. It was sanctioned and approved, and we actually went forward with for about 2 or 3 years to try and put together some footprints and deals in various locations, particularly North America and in the Asian basin, with regards to LNG. Approximately in 2020, April of 2020, I left Saudi Aramco and have opened my international consulting firm focused on global gas and particularly LNG projects.
That's great, and that will help us a lot if you could give us a little bit of background to understand what's going on in LNG markets right now. There's a lot of concern over potential Russian withholding of LNG supplies over the crisis in Ukraine, and we've had a visit from the Qatari Emir in Washington this week. And certainly within U.S. foreign economic policy, we're interested, and the U.S. government and the Biden administration is interested in seeing potential cooperation or perhaps additional supply support to Europe. Is that feasible? How do these markets work?
Rather complicated market the way it's developed. The market itself is driven by essentially suppliers, LNG suppliers, and then LNG buyers. And those buyers are primarily originally located in Asia. So you're looking at China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan. Those were the pioneers and have imported LNG for a significant amount of time. The original contracting model was essentially if you were an LNG supplier, you approached one of the Asian companies and you had a long-term contract of 20 to 25 years with some periodic price indexing so that both the supplier could make some money as prices fluctuated and the actual buyers had some protection in case too much was actually charged for the LNG. So there were opportunities to renegotiate those long-term contracts. Those long-term contracts were needed to underpin the massive capital investment for global LNG projects. So mind you, if we pick one of the recent examples, let's just say Gorgon LNG off of Western Australia, I believe that well, the discovery well was in 1984. It was not commercially produced via Chevron, who is the operator of Gorgon LNG, until about 2014, maybe, for phase one. So we're looking at approximately 30-year lifespan from discovery to actual first production before they actually started recovering some of the revenue and the investment that was put in place. Now, the capital cost for this particular project was on the order of 40 to maybe in excess of $50 billion. That's with a B, $billion worth of investment that these companies put in place. In order to underpin the project financing, long-term contracts were required to demonstrate to those providing the funding and the financing for the project that there was a long-term revenue stream associated with this investment. So the original projects were essentially anchored by what was called tramline contracts. These were 20 plus years. The vessel is loaded on a regular basis and taken to a discrete and distinct market. As the market has evolved and more players have entered the market, additional LNG projects have emerged. What we're starting to see is a shortening of the contract terms. So some of these contract terms are now less than 10 years, which basically means the life of the project, the LNG project itself, is probably 30 plus years. So these contracts have to be renewed 3 times during the life of this particular project, which means a complete renegotiation and restructuring of potential contracts based on the market conditions at the time. So as you have shortened the contractual period down to approximately 7 to 10 years, and in some cases even less, these companies now have to look at a position of where else can we send our cargoes for a longer period of time. And what we actually start seeing is more of a compartmentalized and segmented market basis on the international scale. Now, when it comes to the US has completely changed the LNG model, where it's become a commoditized and segmented value chain. That is to say that the LNG supplier buys the gas from a gas producer or a pipeline or midstream company in the US, takes that gas and converts it into LNG, and then either sells it at the jetty, so at the facility, or charters the vessel, puts it on the vessel, and brings it to the client. And in this particular case, we are now starting to vary destinations. That is to say, originally the off-taker could potentially take the volume across the Atlantic and put it into a terminal in the UK. But they now have options to potentially put it in a terminal in Belgium or in France. And so the destination is now opened up, leaving the buyer the flexibility where they wish to deploy this, still under contractual terms. And another longer evolving segment of the market has become the spot market. Now, of this, when you're looking at about 360 million tons that has the global demand effective last year, there is a percentage of that market that is uncontracted, that sits with portfolio players, players that are willing to take a risk, buy a cargo from somebody and sell a cargo to someone else. And in several cases, these cargoes transfer ownership while en route to certain locations. So the market now has become more dynamic and moving away from the long-term standardized contracts. And now we have a significant component of the spot market where people are trying to capitalize on arbitrage between certain locations that are both producer and marketplaces. And it's that spot market that allows flexibility to deploy cargoes to Asia in the wintertime, should they have severe cold snaps, or it can be diverted to Europe. And Europe has always been viewed as a sink, if you will. This is the market of opportunity. So that is to say, if Asia was full and other countries were full, then producers would actually look at dumping the cargo into Europe for several reasons. Significant amount of access, underutilized regasification terminals. So there's always been capacity available to dump a cargo. And secondarily, there's a reasonable pipeline infrastructure. And when you couple European gas demand, the gas demand model in Europe was originally underpinned by production in very mature fields. Those mature fields are now on decline and are moving towards the termination and abandonment phases and shut-in phases. So therefore, you have a natural decline in European supply that's creating a bit of an opportunity to put in LNG. And part of that demand gap has been filled by Nord Stream 2, most recent pipeline. That's why the pipeline was built. It is not operational yet. Recall that Nord Stream 2 was preceded by Nord Stream 1, which is operational. And then the conventional pipeline route coming from Russian fields in the east across Belarus and Ukraine. And that's currently what's made Europe dependent on cheap Russian gas. Cheap would be one way of phrasing it, commercially advantageous to the Europeans, pricing controlled by the Russian government. So the Russian government is very aware of what supplies it is competing with elsewhere in the world, and therefore can structure some terms and contract terms that are more attractive so that Europeans will then say, well, we'll go ahead and take a blend of Russian gas. And we're in a situation right now where this Russian gas supply is at risk because it is flowing directly through Belarus, it is flowing through the Ukraine, and there is potential that it's flowing through Nord Stream 2, and it is already flowing through Nord Stream 1. These infrastructure routes, although no one has really politicized them over the life of the projects thus far, there have been a few minor hiccups, but they're now moving to the forefront as potentially political tools. And if that actually moves in, it's a game changer for international infrastructure and international business, which has typically been a separate arena from political issues. And in this particular case, it might be a first where infrastructure is moving into the political realm.
So, Wayne, you're describing a more active spot market, more opportunity for new players, new suppliers, particularly into
Mhm.
the European market, which includes the US, shipping more LNG to Europe now, but also potentially more LNG coming from the Middle East, and Qatar as a really important global player, but not necessarily a really important traditionally supplier to Europe, right?
Mhm. So what you find right now is because of the market dynamics, the Qataris were very efficient in signing long-term contracts with Asian buyers. Um, Exxon, as you know, is the single greatest asset within Exxon's portfolio is the Qatari LNG projects. Exxon is the major company, the major international investor in Qatari LNG. They have a joint venture with the Qataris. There is a tram line supply that goes from Qatari positions to the UK. Interestingly enough, several years back, that wouldn't be that big of an issue because the UK was a part of the EU. Now that we start having the separate, or that the UK has withdrawn from the EU, you're running into a situation where it is a distinct supply to the UK, and it is a significant supply for the UK. So the UK has a high degree of reliability on long-term contracts provided by Exxon and QP, the Qataris. Right. When it comes to other European regas entry points, such as in Rotterdam, Zeebrugge, several in France, Portugal, Spain, Italy, all the way around the European continent, and also up north into the Baltics and Germany also. You have a situation where a lot of these facilities are underutilized. So there is a tremendous amount of spare capacity that could take on more LNG. The problem you have if we focus on Qatar is the majority of the Qatari production is already contracted. So therefore, their flexibility to provide you any spot market cargoes is very minimal. So they've opted for a more conservative long-term revenue model as opposed to a higher percentage of at-risk production sold on the spot market. So you'd have to look more to portfolio players that have the flexibility within their bucket of LNG supply to redirect cargoes in certain locations that are unallocated at this particular moment. And those companies are primarily Total, BP, Shell. They have a significantly uncontracted volume in their portfolio that they seek to maximize the revenues depending on who, what destination, what clients require cargoes at a certain period of time. So they have the flexibility to reallocate supply from one position to the next. The key driver there is the way they reallocate that is not out of goodwill. It's allocated and is driven by economics. So there's an optimization of the portfolio that you have that is aimed towards maximizing the revenue and the returns. It is not in a donation type mode. So somewhere along the line, if you're looking to capture spot market volumes and bring them into Europe to displace potential Russian supply, there's going to be some form of a cost. And that cost will be the center of the negotiations as to who will pay that, who will take the discounts, who is willing to give the discounts. I honestly do not believe that any of the global LNG suppliers are seeking to lose money to appease the European Union in providing gas to displace Russian gas. So this is going to be a commercially driven situation. Now, if we move away from Qatar, we've talked about Total and we've talked about Shell. The other area that has potential to supply, although minimally, is the US LNG market because they have some percentage that's unallocated that could be shipped. And for example, Cheniere has potential to reroute cargoes to Europe. But again, these are on an optimized basis. These are not on a regular basis, and these are not significant volumes that you could equate to pipeline volumes that are coming in from the east.
So, Wayne, just to sort of wrap up, you're saying that the solution to a potential gas supply crunch in Europe isn't necessarily, a big national company coming into the rescue. It's a market solution, but it'll be at a much higher price. The spot market is becoming more competitive, and this means that not just Europeans would be paying more for gas, but everyone who's kind of looking for that extra, bit that's available is going to be paying much higher prices. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. And we look back just recently and we see a tremendous rebound from post COVID time to current with LNG prices, particularly driven by Asian rebound in demand and then followed up with European demand. If you now look at this particular time of year, if the Europeans get a significant cold snap and you pair that with the significant cold snap in Northern Asia, and you pair that with a significant cold snap in the US, you're in a very difficult situation. You have the problem where your LNG capacity at the moment and delivery capacity is fully committed. So somewhere, somehow, somebody is going to have to be creative to take volumes of LNG at an irregular basis, because these are spot cargoes, at premium pricing, bringing them into the terminals that are willing to actually pay those prices.
That's excellent. Thank you, Wayne, for explaining this sort of complicated business side of the LNG crunch that we're seeing in Europe, what that means for Middle East producers, and what it means for markets around the world. So I really appreciate you taking the time and being with us. And we hope that everyone enjoyed the good graphics that Wayne supplied for us as well. Thank you, and thank you for being part of our advisory council.
Thanks very much, Karen.